The truth is not subjective. It is not malleable. There is no your truth and my truth. It is not something that we get to pick and choose. It is by its own definition, the truth. But sometimes the truth is difficult to discern, especially in the court system and in the legal system. Now, in America, and many other countries, we use what is called the common law system. And I'm not going to break down the common law system and compare it to other countries, but I will tell you that the objective when you're in court is not necessarily to pursue the truth. The reality is that the goal when you're in trial or in court is to convince a jury of your side of the story. Notice I didn't say your truth, it's your side of the story, your claim in the court system. Now, in this situation, you're going to want to hire an attorney to be your advocate. They are not the truth seeker. If what happens in courtrooms was all about the truth, then simply the two attorneys from both sides of any case would get together in a room, discern between the two of them what the truth of the matter is, and then just come before the judge and say, "Judge, this is what needs to happen." No, instead, your attorney is your advocate, and they are ethically obligated to advocate for you virtually no matter what. Now, oftentimes attorneys will bring in expert witnesses, and experts, their job is to be objective. They are supposed to be purveyors of truth. And you can see, though, that because the goal necessarily isn't the pursuit of truth, but it is actually to convince a jury, that we can sometimes run into a problem. And this problem happens when experts are financially incentivized to become advocates. Now, in the court system, the judge is tasked, part of one of their jobs is to discern if an expert is acting as an advocate or acting as an unbiased scientist, let's say. But this can be very difficult because not every judge, not every attorney is versed in all of the scientific matters that an advocate or that an expert witness will bring forward in a case. So another good example of this is engineering firms that I have come across many times in my career, whose primary clientele is insurance companies. Now, if that engineer or that engineering firm was not successful at getting that insurance company out of paying claims, do you think that insurance company would continue to hire that engineering firm? So it's kind of obvious that engineering firm, I'm not saying that engineering firm lies for money, but you can see how they're financially incentivized to. Which brings us to the case that I want to talk about today, which was a case that I had about 2 years ago that I worked on. And this case involved a homeowners association. This is an aerial image of it that had 5 large lakes. Now, in Florida, most homeowners associations, most neighborhoods, if there's lakes, they were man-made. It used to be a quarry where we got dirt and rock and fill out of, and then eventually a developer buys it, turns those holes into lakes, and then builds a community around it. So in this case, we have an HOA that is suing the developer, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So at this particular HOA, which we use short for homeowners association, the lakes were cut and built by the developer and the contractor in 2006. Now in 2014, end of 2014, beginning of 2015, the association went through what's called turnover, and I will explain that a little bit more later. But essentially it goes from the developer's control to the residents' control. Then in 2019, towards the end of 2019 and early 2020, the homeowners association decides to sue the developer. And what they're suing them over has to do with lake bank erosion. And we'll get to the claim in a few minutes, but I want to explain to you what a turnover is. So as a developer is developing a neighborhood and an HOA, they run everything. They are the association, they're the board, they're the developer, they're the property owner, they're the landowner, they're everything. As that developer sells houses and sells lots, which I've depicted here, highlighted in orange, They will continue selling lots over years, and then they will sell more of the neighborhood, and then eventually they'll sell enough of the property that in most states, and particularly in Florida, a statute will kick in which requires the developer to turn over control of the association board to the residents of the community that are already living there. And so that's what occurred in 2014, was this turnover. Now, from 2014, at the very end of 2014, the beginning of 2015, this particular homeowners association was in control now of the board, and they were responsible for maintaining the lakes as part of, in addition to the roads and everything else in the neighborhood. In the time period from 2014 to the time that they sued, they got 3 separate engineering reports, and eventually they got an additional report. Okay, and so it's kind of interesting because it's a situation that I find often in my profession, where essentially somebody is what I call shopping for an opinion. So finally, they got this 4th engineer's report, and they were able to use this 4th engineer's report to assign damages. So dollars, how much money does the developer owe us? And again, their claim is related to lake bank erosion, lack of maintenance, and so on. So this 4th engineer was sort of tasked with determining what and how much, what damages and how much of the damages is associated to the developer. And so it was around this time that this 4th engineer's report came out that the developer and their attorneys actually retained my services. Now, usually I don't work for developers. I almost exclusively work for the end homeowners, end users, the homeowners associations, the condo associations, the building owners, and the end users. But in this particular case, when I read the 4th engineer's report and I realized there were some red flags that I saw, which we'll get into later in this video, and this is why I took this case on, and I think you'll understand why. So in the 4th engineer's report, they kind of state what their objectives are with the report. And they discuss kind of their methodology and their conclusions. So this paragraph here is right from their report, and it says that their goal was basically to understand the progression of the lake bank erosion using historical aerial photographs, okay, which were obtained from the Florida Department of Transportation. And they grabbed these aerial photographs for the year 2006, 2015, and 2019. And the reason why they grabbed 2015 is because that was the closest aerial view of when turnover was. So you have 2006 when the lakes were first built, 2015 when turnover was, and then the current year, which was 2019. Now, to determine when the erosion of the lake bank started, the aerials were used to carefully trace the location of the top of the lake bank of critical lake sections around the community. What constitutes a critical lake section? I don't know. Then the line work created for each year was combined into a single exhibit for comparison, ensuring accuracy in the line work location using the coordinate system. So what they're saying is that they took the images from 2006, 2015, 2019, laid them on top of each other using a universal coordinate system in a piece of software. In this case, they ended up using AutoCAD to do this. Okay, then they go on and say, after evaluating the single exhibit, so in other words, they combined all 3 of these images, one on top of each other, into one single exhibit. After evaluating the single exhibit and comparing the location of the top of the lake bank in year 2006, year 2015, and year 2019, as compared to the rear of the homes abutting the lake, it was determined that by the year 2015, so again, this is important because this is turnover, they're saying that 73.76% of the current erosion had already occurred. So here is this magic number, which they are going to use, the plaintiff used, which is the HOA, to calculate damages. So for example, if to correct the lake banks cost $2 million, let's say, then they would be expecting about $1.4 to $1.5 million from the developer to put in towards that. So that's the goal of this report, was to establish this number, this 73.76. And the way that they did it was by taking these aerials and they said carefully tracing on top. And so that creates this process, all right? So you take the images from these 3 years, you lay them on top of each other in AutoCAD, you trace the top of the bank for each year, and then you compare those lines to each other and you measure them. Now, so for example, if the lake bank in 2006 were here, and then it was like, let's say it was like right here, and then in 2015 it's right here, you can see that the lake bank has moved inward, and therefore we have loss of soil and loss of lake bank. However, there are some problems with this process. One is the resolution of the data that they're using, the images that they're using. We call this the ground sampling distance. And so for these aerial images that are taken, for example, in 2015 and 2019, the ground sampling distance was 6 inches. What this means is that essentially 1 pixel in the image is the equivalent of 6 inches on the Earth. Well, in 2006, because it was older technology and an older time period, the ground sampling distance was 1 foot. So 1 pixel was the equivalent of 1 foot. Well, this goes into the accuracy, right? I mean, you're not going to be able to measure anything off of an image if 1 pixel is the equivalent of 1 foot. You're not going to be able to measure anything closer than a foot in accuracy. The other problem with their process is the reproducibility. They said that they carefully traced the top of the bank, but they didn't define what the top of the bank was, and they didn't use any sort of standard methodology that other engineers or other scientists could use to reproduce the work and come to the same results. And then the other thing that they didn't really account for was something called orthorectification. So orthorectification is a process that occurs in order to correct satellite and aerial imagery. So looking at this picture here, you can see the satellite up in the corner of the screen, and it is taking a picture of the Earth, but it's not directly over the Earth. It's taking it kind of at an angle. And so if you look at that view kind of flattened out over here, you can see that anything that's close to the satellite or the airplane, if they used a plane to take the image, is going to be relatively close in the image. Things on the ground are going to look relatively close. As you get further away from the satellite image or the airplane, you can see that things on the ground are going to appear stretched out. So the process of orthorectification is to take this image that is, quote, that is technically distorted, and it is to put it into a piece of software using landmarks that we know and can recognize on the Earth, and stretching and skewing that image back into shape to as closely as possible approximate reality. Well, this process was done in 2006. Who knows who the technician was or what software they used, right? And the process was done in 2015, and the process was done in 2019. These were separate orthorectifications for each of this aerial imagery. And so there's no way, I've worked with this stuff for years, and there's no way you're going to get these aerial images from different dates to perfectly lay on top of each other, which means that in order for their process to even have the slightest chance of working, they would have to take the images and subject them to orthorectification again in order to bring them all in a line with each other. But at this point now, you're relying on taking measurements from an image that has been distorted from software and was taken from a satellite. They were compensating for things like curvature of the Earth, angle of the lens, and various aspects of the lens geometry as well. So we've already talked about how the flaws in the process create, at best, a plus or minus 1 foot accuracy limit, right? And I'll show you later how that actually is, it's actually much worse the way they ended up doing it. But the best case scenario they could possibly hope for, if they did the whole process correct, and you set aside for a moment the subjectivity of where you draw these lake banks, is plus or minus 1 foot. Well, the fourth engineer, I'm just going to keep referring to them as the fourth engineer for this video. The fourth engineer included in his report measurements of, let's say, 4.97 feet, 4.68 feet, 3.19 feet. And so this last digit that you include in a number when you're creating a measurement is called your degree of accuracy, okay? And so what he is essentially saying in this report is that they were able to measure things down to 1/100th of a foot degree of accuracy. But I just showed you that the images at best only had a 1 foot accuracy because that's the size of a pixel. So in the report, they actually provide some presentations, okay, some exhibits, if you will. And so here they show the 3 arrows. Now they don't show them on top of each other, but they show them next to each other. This is one of the exhibits from their report. Now it's going to be pretty much impossible for you guys to see, so I'll just kind of circle them. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 locations that they tested or did this methodology in. They didn't do all the lake banks. They just picked 7 locations. Why they picked those locations, we don't know. They just called them critical locations, okay? But what that was the idea. And so if you look at this peninsula here, this little piece of land sticking out into the lake, and you look at it on the 2019 and you look at it on the 2015, what they did was they claimed that they traced the lake bank from each of these aerials and then they perfectly laid them on top of each other to create this exhibit. So here is that peninsula. It's shown only on the 2019 aerial, but they show line work for 2006, 2015, and 2019. Now in 2006, the line work is solid, and in 2015, you can see that it's dashed, and then in 2019, it's dotted. Now, you can kind of see that line work. It's a little clearer over here on the left side of the image. You can see where each of those lines are and how they move in. And so then what they did was they said, okay, well, this peninsula is too much for us to measure. So let's just measure this peninsula, which is one of 7 locations, right? And let's just measure it at 3 sections. So 1, 2, 3. Again, going back to scientific methodology, why were these sections picked? What's the methodology? What's the reproducibility? What's to say that another scientist or engineer doesn't come by and pick this section, that section, and this section? Right? So that's a flaw in the way their whole system is designed. But here they show that 2006 is essentially the benchmark. So yeah, 2006, all 3 locations, section 1, 2, and 3, it's 0 feet. Then they claim that the lake bank moved in by 4.97 feet, for example, at this location by the year 2015. Okay, and then they did the same thing for 2019, and then they came up with what percentage, so obviously by 2019, 100% of whatever erosion was going to occur between 2006 and 2019 has occurred, so that's 100%. But the real thing to focus on, which is how they assign damages to the developer, is these figures here, 43%, 91%, and 100%. So they're claiming that by the time of year 2015, this lake had suffered this level of erosion. Now, they did this for multiple locations over each of the 7, so you have about 21 locations that they did this for, and then they went ahead and averaged them all together, ending up with 73.76% of the erosion all occurred prior to 2015. So that's that magic number from the report that I read you earlier, and essentially they use that figure to say that the developer essentially owes the HOA 73.76% of whatever the bill is going to be to fix these lake banks, right? That's the argument, that's the idea. So I was looking at this, and I'm looking at the exhibit, and I said, something doesn't seem right here. First off, I already know the methodology's bad, but even if the process has flaws in it, the flaws are so egregious, I don't know how you would not observe them or see them while you're trying to create this exhibit, right? So at this point, this is all I had was the report and some of the other supporting documents. So I said to the attorney who was working for the developer, I said, listen, where is the AutoCAD file from the 4th engineer that produced this report? I need to see how they produced this report. So whenever you do a case like this, expert witness case, you typically get subpoenaed for all of your documents. And I mean, this is emails, text messages, files, Word files, AutoCAD files, everything. Well, it's really interesting that the 4th engineer produced everything in their production of documents, except for the AutoCAD file. So I told the attorney, you need to request the AutoCAD file. The attorney requested the AutoCAD file. And now finally I had the actual raw data that the engineer used, the 4th engineer used in order to create these exhibits. And so I'm going to go through my analysis of that with you real quick. So this is using their AutoCAD file, and you can see that this is the 2019 aerial that I turned on, and I turned on their drawing. I didn't draw this red line. This is their drawing of the 2019 top of bank. And you can see over on the right side where maybe they drew this line where the sandy part looks like it matches the green part, right? You've got green grass and you've got like sandy shoreline. Okay, that kind of makes sense. But then you come over to the left side, which remember was one of the critical areas they used to measure erosion. And you can see that the line is clearly within a green area. Or you could argue that it's just arbitrarily drawn. You know, but my question would be, why wasn't the line drawn here? Or why wasn't the line drawn here? There seems to be no rhyme or reason as to why they placed the line where they did in 2019, other than to produce the results they were trying to produce. So then I said, okay, well, let's look at the 2006 image and 2006 top of bank line. Now remember, in 2006, the ground sampling distance was 1 foot. So 1 pixel is the equivalent of 1 foot. So if this looks very blurry on your screen right now, that's because it is a blurry image, okay? But this is the image nonetheless that they had to work with, that they used to draw the lake banks. Now you tell me, what logic or what methodology did they use to draw the 2006 line onto this 2006 image? It doesn't seem to match with anything. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So then I thought, well, gee, I know there's difficulties with the process, so maybe I should check to see if the images are even lined up with each other correctly. So I thought, okay, I'm going to take the 2006 aerial and I'm going to outline these 3 homes on the peninsula. I'm going to do that in white. If you can't see that very well on your screen, I'll kind of highlight them in red. Maybe that'll come out better. But I took these 3 houses and I traced them in AutoCAD. All right, now this is my line work. And then all I did in order to compare to see if they actually lined up these photos correctly and did even their own process correctly was I left the lines there, but I turned off the 2006 aerial and I turned on the 2019 aerial. And when you do that, you can actually see that, for example, over here at this corner of the house, the 2006 house is 6 feet off from the 2019 house. That means these aerial images aren't lined up even close to each other at all. But if you also notice something, over here, it's not quite as far off. And over here, it's actually off in the other distance. So what's going on between these 2 images? Well, what's going on between these 2 images is not only are they not laid over on top of each other correctly, but they haven't been ortho-rectified to each other, and they're at different scales, different skew, and different rotation than each other. So I thought, well, this is very odd. Why would you do that unless you were trying to manipulate the data to produce the results that you wanted to produce? So I said, I need to zoom out in AutoCAD and take a better look of what's going on here. Now, I've highlighted, I've kind of drawn this around in a square for the 2019 aerial. Now, what's really interesting about the aerial imagery is that the 2006 aerial imagery is much larger than the 2019 aerial imagery and the 2015 aerial imagery. And that's because it's a lower resolution, right? It has a 1 foot per pixel. The other ones have 6 inches per pixel. So you clearly would end up with a smaller digital footprint image for a higher density resolution. So here you can see the 2019 aerial image is overlaid on top of the 2016, or the 2006. So all of this is the 2006 image. Now, the 2019 aerial, now this was, I noticed when I zoomed out in AutoCAD and I went to the proper space where I could see this, that there was multiples of these set up. And I thought, well, that's really odd. Why wouldn't you just lay the images over and then get all 7 of your location measurements done at once? But no, there was actually 7 of these versions. This is one of them, one of these versions of overlays. And you can see they put some text. You don't need to be able to read it. I can't even read it. But this is for this particular peninsula here that I circled in red that they're testing, where they wanted to test and compare. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Okay, so they lined up these aerials in order to get the results they needed at this location. But I thought to myself, what is going on up here where the 2019 aerial image ends and the 2006 image continues? Do those match up? And when you zoom in on that, you can actually see that the roads aren't even close to matching up. Okay, you can see that they're very, very far off. And then not only are the roads very far off, but you can actually tell that they're to different scales. Okay, so this road is only this wide, and this road is this wide. So, and if you think, well, that's because it's 2006 and 2019. No, nothing really changed with the road between those years. In fact, you can see the entrance to the community was already there in 2006 with the ramp area to go into that area. So nothing really changed with that. These are just two images that are at completely odd scales with each other in order to produce the results that they were looking for this peninsula. And then I thought, well, let's look at this area over on the bottom left here. Okay, and when we zoom in on that area where those two images match up, you can see that the road is again completely out of scale. So here's your width and breadth of the road. Okay, and you can see that they don't line up and they're actually out of scale with each other. So I thought this is interesting. Something funny is going on here now. Nobody does this as an accident. If you're trying to do what they claim that they did, which was lay the imagery over on top of each other, you would have orthorectified these three images to each other, and you would only have one location where you're doing this, not 7 different versions where you're rotating and skewing the images to get the results that you want. So I said, well, let's check another one. So I checked this one here, which is the overlay setup that they did in order to test and check the lake bank here at this location. Now, again, this is your 2019 aerial right here that I'm boxing out. And you can already tell, it probably jumps out at you, that if you zoom in on this area over here, where the 2019 and the 2006 aerials match up with each other, you can see just how out of whack the roads are now. So clearly this image, this 2019 aerial for this exhibit, in order to get them the results they needed here, was rotated, skewed, scaled, and modified in order to get the results that they were looking for. At the end of the day, I could only conclude that this engineer fully knew what they were doing and that they were, in essence, advocating for their client. They had abandoned the pursuit of truth. They had molested the art of science, and they had decided that it was their job to get their client payment. Well, I wrote a rebuttal report and pointing out all of these problems, mistakes, and basically questionable ethical actions that they took. And I sent that on to the attorney, and I would say about a week, maybe 2 weeks, within 2 weeks, that case, they completely dropped it. And that engineer pulled out and withdrew because no engineer wants to go to court with this document knowing that they had been caught. And that was the fastest settlement of my career of all the cases that I've worked on so far. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I look forward to next time.